Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's CIPR Scotland Bite-Sized Briefing. I'm Lisa Fox-Bennett, Secretary of CIPR Scotland and an Account Manager at 3x1 Group, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. We're going to be discussing the influencer and the pandemic today, and just a wee reminder that this event is worth 5 CIPR CPD points. If you're sharing comments on Twitter, please use the hashtag CIPR Bitesize. You'll see on your wee screens that there's an option to ask questions at the bottom. So if anyone has any questions, if we've got time at the end, we will discuss those with our panelists. I'd also suggest just popping your video on gallery mode, which is usually at the top right of your screen. Just to thank Rona Deb, who's our admin manager for today, and just to let you all know that we will be recording today's session. Just another wee note that while today's event is completely free, we would love attendees to make a donation to iProvision. That's the CIPR Benevolent Fund, and that supports members who've lost their jobs or their income or who are struggling. So just stuff like that. So yeah, I'd like to start by introducing our fantastic, marvelous 3 guests today. I'll start with Charlotte. So by Charlotte Ann is a lifestyle influencer and she's based in Glasgow. Our second influencer is Eden Eats, aka Ailsa, who is a food and drink influencer based in Edinburgh. And Keelan, who's a fashion influencer and lifestyle as well, also based in Edinburgh. Thank you so much for agreeing to take part, and I'm sure this will be a really, really interesting discussion. So COVID-19 has really changed the way that social media operates. Studies have shown that usage of social media is higher than ever before, with more and more of us spending time on platforms such as Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. On the other side, you've got the economic downturn and the recession that we're currently in, with brands having to justify their spend more and more. Today, we're going to be discussing how the influencers have had to adapt in these uncertain times and what they'll be doing differently to survive. So to start off, I'd just like to ask each of you to give us a wee bit of background about your channels. Charlotte, maybe you could kick us off.
Yeah, sure. So I started blogging 10 years ago now. So I originally started my blog, it used to be called Colours and Carousels because I named it after the song that was in my MSN name at the time. And I started that to build some experience before I went to uni to study fashion communication. I wanted to be a fashion writer. So I thought that was a good way to get my foot in the door because I didn't really have any experience and obviously couldn't really travel down to London to do all these internships at the Glossies as much as I would have loved to. Now it's definitely a lot more lifestyle focused. It's kind of just stuff about food and books and life self-employed, studying, mental health, all of that sort of stuff now.
Fab. Keelan, would you mind introducing your channels, please?
Yeah, no problem. So my Instagram page is called Where What Works. And just as background, it sort of started up bit of an amateur in comparison to Charlotte, but I started up just over 2 years ago. When I graduated from uni and started working full time. So I work as a town planner, but I had such an interest still in fashion and clothes. And it was always a toss up between if I wanted to study journalism or the sort of geography town planning route. So when I started working full time, it was just a sort of output for me to still carry on the love of fashion. And then a blog followed shortly after the Instagram page. So it meant I could keep writing and that sort of thing. So it's just evolved since then. It basically started with standing in my hallway before going to work, sharing literally what I was wearing that day. And it's just sort of taken off from there, just now evolved into fashion, lifestyle, sort of a little bit of everything, a bit of positivity and all that good stuff.
Fab. And Ailsa, Eden Eats.
Yeah, so I run the Instagram page Eden Eats, and I always joke that it's like a hobby that sort of got out of control. So I lived in America for 5 years as a nanny, and whilst I was there, spent a lot of time in New York, and I was always having to scroll TripAdvisor to find where was the best places to eat. And through that was back in 2013, 2014, and Instagram was really just beginning. But I noticed in New York there was all these incredible food accounts. So when I was living there, I started following all of those to get my own inspiration for where I wanted to eat. And I'd always sort of had an interest in taking photos and things anyway. So whenever I was out to eat, I was always taking photos and putting them on my personal Instagram. And all my friends and family would be like, really, another food pic? Like, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to start my own. So when I moved back in 2015, I started Ed and Eats and just, shared pictures when I was out and about. And yeah, it's grown since then. And that's basically it.
Fantastic. I think we'll start just by going back to the beginning of the year, the world pre-lockdown and pre-COVID, which seems like quite a long time ago now, even though it's actually reasonably recent. Obviously, we had no idea about the impact that the pandemic was going to have. Caoilinn, I'll ask you first, how did you find the world of influencing back then?
Yeah, it was really exciting. And as I say, I only sort of got into this 2 years ago, so I only started doing more things maybe within the last year. So for me, it was quite busy. Maybe from this time last year, so August 2019, and it was just sort of ticking along until the beginning of this year, obviously. So for me, it was really exciting, and there was a lot going on, especially in Edinburgh and that sort of thing. So while I was able to juggle my work and Instagram stuff, it was getting to the point where it was getting really, really busy. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, but it did sort of come to that crash and halt, I guess, when lockdown, just like everything for everyone. So yeah, it was obviously a lot different, but it was exciting, I think, is just how I would describe it.
Elsa, what do you think?
I'd say the same as Caoilinn, really. Like, my full-time job, I'm furloughed at the moment, but I work for a creative services company in social media called Meraki Concept Studio. So I started that job last September, and I was quite busy sort of like establishing my feet within like this sort of new job and balancing going to like a lot of invites, a lot of events, and it was really quite busy. Good for social life, but also like sometimes saying yes far too much. But yeah, like, you know, as we moved into March, everything changed, and I'm sure that's the same for everybody.
Charlotte, did you find everything was really busy pre-COVID and then it just suddenly came to a crashing halt like the rest of the world?
Yeah, pretty much. Like I said, I don't really blog as much anymore. It's definitely more of a hobby for me because like Ailsa, I work in digital marketing, so I work on a lot of influencer campaigns, and when it comes to the end of the day, I'm like, can't be bothered writing my own content when I've spent so long coordinating all these other things. But it was definitely, for me, it felt like it was kind of at a bit of a turning point where brands were starting to realise the value of micro influencers. And I felt like I was getting approached for a lot more campaigns that I wouldn't usually. So much bigger campaigns, just because they wanted to focus more on a very specific niche audience. And I've not got a big audience by any means, but the audience I do have all kind of tend to fit like a very specific demographic. So it was this really weird moment, and at the same time I was moving house like the week before a pandemic, which was intense. Yep, don't recommend. Yeah, so it was just this absolute chaos because I was also studying for a master's degree at the same time.
Don't do things by halves, Charlotte.
No, I really don't. So it was this absolute chaos of trying to manage all of like my work campaigns through my own channels, a move, and a degree as well. No wonder I'm tired. Yeah, so it was definitely like getting to this point where everything was changing, and now it's just like, okay, great, I'll just come to a stop.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting actually you say about micro influencing. What do you think makes a good brand partnership? I'll just start with Charlotte just to kick that off.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is there has to be a good fit between the brand and the influencer and the influencer's audience, but I think as well there has to be mutual value throughout, and so everyone involved, like the brand, the influencer and the audience, have to get some sort of value out of it. And I think a lot of the time people maybe forget that final part, like providing value for the audience as well, because a lot of the time people get fed up of seeing these campaigns where it's like, all right, this big influencer has been flown to the Maldives again, like great, I can't do that. So it's about creating something that's relevant and attainable.
And is that something you think's become even more important since COVID-19?
Yeah, definitely. There's been a bit of a growing backlash towards influencers, and I could understand a lot of it, to be honest, especially when you look at the likes of the kind of stereotypical social media personality that have like come up through Love Island and things like that. There's like this real distrust for them, and people now more than ever, because we are in situations where it's like lots of people are losing their jobs, they've had like family members that have been ill, all of that sort of stuff, the kind of disconnect between an influencer and the audience has become like really, really striking. And I think it must be so off-putting for people to be like, oh right, my income's gone, but sure, you unbox another designer handbag, great.
Keelan, what are your thoughts in terms of that authenticity and that the importance of brand partnerships?
Yeah, I think just off the back of that, I think there is a stark contrast between obviously huge influencers, which I'd say the majority of us follow and enjoy their content, me personally speaking anyway, but there definitely is a contrast between that sort of influencer and sort of micro influencer, as you mentioned. For me personally, I think from my perspective, it's taken on things that I know my audience will enjoy. I like to think I have quite a nice relationship with the people who follow me. They follow me for a reason, and I like to try and uphold that. And I think the main thing there is just transparency. As like yourself, also, like it's just a hobby for me. So I can totally understand, especially right now, if this is someone's job, they're going to be maybe taking things that are going to maybe tide them over, and that sort of thing. But feel like I'm quite fortunate that I can still maintain that transparency and just take on maybe work, or just, if you want to promote something, even if it isn't work, I'm always thinking of the audience and who's looking at this at the end of the day, and because I think when it comes down to it, if you're routinely then sharing things that are off brand for you, then you do sort of start to lose interest in people, and they're just like, oh, actually this is maybe becoming a bit of a sellout. I don't know. For maybe
that
one for better. Yeah, just one for better word there. But yeah, I think it's transparency, and I think another massive thing is brands understanding your audience as well. I think I've come to realise that it's quite obvious in some campaigns that brands will go automatically to somebody with a huge number sitting at the top of their profile. But I think once you delve into that a wee bit, it's like, what are the numbers watching their stories? What's the engagement like on a post on their feed? So I think, and especially when all the sort of glitz and glam was taken away from posting on Instagram, when we were in lockdown, we quite literally could not go anywhere. It was the authenticity of the content that was being produced even throughout lockdown that, I found myself going towards influencers that were really like embracing that and still giving out really good content. So I think that's a huge thing for me as well.
Elsa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with both Charlotte and Keelan. I think for me it's a little bit different because I don't have that lifestyle aspect, so I don't think particularly my audience follow me for that. They follow me because I go out and eat and review. So at the beginning of lockdown, I sort of realised myself, like, oh, I've been so busy like eating out all the time, which I'm very privileged and very lucky to do. But actually I never just cook, or like I've never taken the time to actually learn to properly cook things. So I actually started a new account during lockdown called Eden Cooks, and I was like, it's a bit of like a comical, like follow my cooking journey sort of thing, because I also appreciate that not everybody that follows my food page for the reviews will want recipes. So I mean, it's got a very small following. I definitely don't post on it enough because I'm so busy again. But I think just sort of realising that it's quite important to be able to like pivot your content, to maybe think, right, we are at home, I can't post restaurant reviews, but also here's some other content, here's some recipes, here's maybe, a little bit more of me, as opposed to like on Eden Eats, I don't really feel I can show as much. So yeah, I think in terms of working with that brand partnership, I always think something that's really important for me is the brand knowing my audience, but also setting out the expectations from the offset. Because I get quite a lot of emails, which, can you review this? Can you review that? But I love it when a brand comes to you and says, I'd like 1 grid post, I'd like 5 stories, or do you know what I mean? Or I like that, because there's an expectation there and I know that I can meet it. When there's not an expectation there, I sometimes worry, am I doing enough? Am I not doing like what they want? So for me, that's something really important, because I don't get offered a lot of paid partnerships, because the food is really the payment a lot of the time. So I want to make sure I'm giving the brand the best that they can get from me. But I think, expectation is a big part of that, for them and for myself too.
And you've all said that obviously when lockdown first started, things got a bit quieter. Is that something that's continued, or are you starting to find things pick up again? Ilse, I'll just start with yourself.
For me, it was quite a weird one. Like, when we went into lockdown straight away, everything stopped. Like, there was no people reaching out from like PR companies or restaurants, obviously, because the food and drink industry was one of the like majorly hit industries straight off the bat. Like, to be told one day you have to shut your doors, like my heart broke for so many restaurants and so many business owners at that moment, because I was like, wow, that is literally, your life has been changed overnight. So obviously, I think it was around 3 weeks, and then things started to come in again, because a lot of the brands and restaurants that were able to do an at-home offering. And that's when I started to get a lot of restaurants like getting in touch about their at-home stuff and deliveries. And I guess they'd taken a little bit of time to rework their business and think about how they could make it work going forward. But I'd say there was about a month that was quiet, but it's got busier and busier since then. I'm probably the busiest I've ever been, actually, right now. But so I don't know if that's the same for everyone, but that was my experience.
Charlotte, Keelan, what have you found?
It's definitely been very similar for me, both from a work perspective and from a content creation perspective. Like, it got very quiet very quickly, which was scary, but it's definitely picked up as people have started to pivot their business and try to like raise some awareness. But I've actually not really been taking on anywhere near as many collaborations and partnerships that have been offered to me, because I've definitely got a bit like spend happy instead. Like, I feel like if it's something that I like and I'm in a position to purchase it, that kind of way, I've gone through that kind of thing. But instead, I've been on the other side coordinating a lot more campaigns, and I think one of the biggest things that's come out of this is the role of influencers as content creators. So I've had a few clients where like they've maybe launched something new, but they've not been able to shoot it. They've not been able to like get in the studio or get photographers or anything like that. So in those kind of situations, it has been so valuable to send things out to influencers and get the content that way. Like, it's not necessarily just about the audience, it is about the other kind of services that they provide. And from that perspective, again, like, this is the busiest I've ever been. It's been surreal how quickly it changed. It just went from absolutely dead to now chaos, which is great. I'm feeling so grateful to be in this position, but I was not prepared for it to turn out like this at all.
Keelan, what are your thoughts?
I guess sort of a mixture of the two. So I think socially speaking, it's starting to pick back up again. But I think on the flip side of that, lockdown really made me realise that I was sort of living from like hour to hour, just trying to fit as much in as possible, sort of going on clockwork, and having that like stop time and time to sort of reevaluate what means the most to me and that sort of thing. I think I've been a bit more picky choosy with what I actually do, and I think in the end up it's actually going to work out better, because again, going back to that authenticity, you're going to be doing things and attending events that you actually really want to be there for and promote, and not just because, oh, such and such is going, or I'll just say yes because it was nice that they asked me, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's definitely benefits to that, and I do see it picking back up again. It's still pretty quiet for me, to be honest. I have, as you say, Charlotte, there's been a lot more the sort of sending out PR samples and that sort of thing they shoot and post about. And I think that links into sort of what you were saying, Elsa, about expectations. So for me, that's been a big thing that I've been learning about, and trying to communicate with people or brands where I really like to support sort of local and smaller independent businesses on that as well. So it's just trying to strike a balance between that going forward. But yeah, it definitely is picking up again. But I think we sort of have the luxury now of, personally have the luxury of actually just doing what I want and just sort of focusing on what really works for me and my, not a selfish way, but like for the channel, I suppose.
I think that authenticity side is really, really important though, and I think it would be a benefit to comms professionals in the long term to have these, and to businesses too, to have these really authentic brand partnerships. And just going back to something I'd said earlier about people being on their phones more and on social media more, have you found your reach? How have your reach been impacted by COVID? Keelan, I'll start with yourself.
Yeah, for me, it's actually worked massively in my favour. So as you say, obviously, there's a lot more people on their phones, or at the height of it, I mean, there was quite literally nothing else to do. My screen time personally was horrendous. So yeah, it's worked out really well for me in the sense that my impressions are huge, my reach has really grown. And also it was that sort of thing of being able to look and see what did better than other things, and then just sort of capitalise on that and put out more of the same content. Obviously variations of. I think as well, personally speaking, my channel always has been very geared towards real life and reality and just sort of going about my day. So it still worked throughout lockdown, even though there wasn't very much exciting happening. I think people were able to sort of clue into that and feel, that it was somebody they sort of knew was posting, or it was a friend sort of just updating them on their day. So yeah, it's grown a lot, and like my following's grown a lot over lockdown. But again, I think it's just, as you say, just from people being on their phones more and that sort of thing.
Ilse, have you found the same?
Yeah, especially I think during like peak lockdown, like where we're a few weeks in and we still couldn't go out and do anything except for our daily exercise. But I'd say now it's sort of starting to tail off again. I did like a couple of like giveaways and stuff, which always helps with like reach and things like that. But yeah, I'd say it peaked and now it's probably starting to sort of level off to what it would usually be. I think, yeah, it was just during that time, every Friday I started doing a roundup of all the local businesses that had started to deliver or had opened their doors for collection, and I found that really helped my reach, because I just wanted to help them out by putting the word out, but then I was getting so many businesses getting in touch being like, oh, can you include us in next week's roundup? And actually I think like it ended up benefiting them and me, because they would share like if I had put them on their story and stuff. So yeah, during that time definitely, but I think it's starting to sort of level off again now.
I suppose if you gain new followers during that time, though, they're likely to stick with you, and they've sort of built that bond with you almost. Yeah, it's actually like what Keelan said about them almost being like a friend. So they've gone through this journey with you, yeah, and they're more likely to keep going, I would assume. Charlotte, what about you? How have you found it?
Yeah, very much the same. I think the biggest thing for me was not necessarily just the reach, but kind of the impact, like the conversations that I was having with people. Like I had so many more actual conversations with people that followed me and viewed my content. I used to always have quite a lot of conversations with people, but especially when everyone was just on their phones constantly, I felt like every time I posted a story, like I was just posting things like, this is what I'm cooking today, because like most people in lockdown, I got very back into baking. So I felt like I was having conversations that maybe resonated a little bit more, and my following didn't grow a lot, but that was fine because I felt like I was reaching the right people and the sort of people that I wanted my content to impact on. So it was all people who could relate to the stuff I was sharing, or who lived in Glasgow, were having similar experiences and just cared about similar things. So it was very much a case of, I felt like I was able to strengthen the relationship that I had with existing followers and the new followers that did come throughout lockdown.
So obviously you've touched on it, your area of expertise is slightly different. How are you finding the food and drink landscape now?
In the last few weeks, like crazy busy. Like I'm behind in posting, which I actually hate because it stresses me out. But I also am very aware of not bombarding it, because there's a lot of people out there who are still uncomfortable with eating out. And like, I mean, during lockdown, like I'm very passionate about mental health, and like I'd actually did a course on it and stuff during lockdown, and it's something that I would like to be able to share more, but I'm sort of a bit unsure of how that would fit. But I try and be quite mindful of not completely like overloading it with, oh, you should go eat at X, Y, and Z, because I'm also aware that there's a lot of people at home right now that don't feel comfortable. But it's a bit of a hard balance to strike, because having gone into these, like if it's a local restaurant, I don't charge them, because I don't, right now the businesses are on their knees, and that's a personal thing. Like, this is a hobby for me. I'm not making a living from it. I'm on furlough at the moment, but I'm in the position where I can go and eat and not, you know, I just don't feel comfortable with charging like local businesses right now. It doesn't feel right. But I think, yeah, it's a hard thing, because I'm trying to be mindful of not posting too much, but also having these really horrible conversations with restaurant owners when I'm in, and hearing them sort of tell you the reality of how things are and how things are looking for the next few months. I want to do everything that I can to help, but yeah, I'm finding navigating that a little bit difficult, just purely seeing it from both sides, from the consumer side, but also the business owner side. It's not an easy time for anyone, and I think that's what is the hardest part for me at the moment. Yeah.
Kaylin, you mentioned that you've been a wee bit less busy, but in terms of brand partnerships, would you say that they've changed in terms of the content you're being asked to create and the content you're wanting to create?
Yes and no. I think, as I said before, it's allowed me to realize the content that I want to create. I haven't had many like specific brand collaborations where they've said, you know, this is what we want from you. It's collaborations I've had recently have been quite open book, and like discuss about, you know, what we could create together, more than being asked, you know, can you do this for us? So it's been quite nice in that sense. So I would say, sort of, actually on the whole, no, it hasn't changed massively, because just like Elsa, this for me is a hobby at the end of the day. So if there's something that I don't agree with, or, you know, I'll happily just say, you know, it doesn't align, or, you know, I'm not feeling comfortable enough to work on that. So yeah, I think overall probably not. But personally speaking, sort of out with brand collaborations, I think, yeah, what I'm putting out there is slightly different, in the sense that I've just been more like open, honest, real, and just tried to, the here and now is just sort of what the theme of what I've been trying to put out there, I think, during this whole time. Yeah, it's just sort of be a bit positive and share what I want to share, rather than what I think I should be sharing, if that makes sense.
Charlotte, what's your thoughts in terms of partnerships and content creation?
Yeah, I think realistically the type of campaigns that I find work best, both like before everything that's happened and now, is when there is that communication between people. I think everyone understands their own part, and people should be allowed to like people should have faith in that the other people know what they're talking about from their experiences. Like, I know that in the past I've had campaigns that I've worked on as an influencer where they're like, okay, we want you to post this content, this copy, this call to action, like here's your hashtag, yeah, can't talk, here's your hashtags, here's like what the creative should be. And I just go back to them and I'm like, I know that my audience isn't going to respond to that. Like, my audience do feel like my pals. Like, I talk to them all the time, and I think people need to understand that it's about like collaborating and finding that middle ground where there is the sweet spot that it works for everyone.
I suppose, as we were saying earlier about the authenticity and you all looking at your channels in that particular way, it's probably even more important to have these partnerships work and to actually have that discussion. I suppose, what would be, Ilse, I'll ask yourself this one. Someone's asked this question, I can't take credit for it, but it ties in really nicely. What's helpful? What would be helpful for you in terms of from a PR person? So a brief, what would be useful? What do you want to know from PR professionals? What do you want them to ask you before you collaborate on something? And what doesn't work? I know Charlotte's mentioned that being too rigid can cause problems and if it won't resonate with your audience.
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned before, just like the expectation side is really important for me. And also just sort of, I like it when it's set out from the offset. Like I did some work with Innis and Gunn at the start of the week, for example, and they came to me and they said, we're opening a new tap room in Edinburgh, but our main focus is we want to show how safe it is and all the measures that we've put into place. And that was sort of one of the main focus of their campaign. I mean, they got quite creative and they created a metre-long hot dog to remind people of the metre, like 1 metre plus physical distancing. And I just liked that angle because it was like, right, we want you to focus on this. And I was like, right, yeah, I'm on board because I think that people need reassurance right now. And they need to know that the restaurants are taking the measures seriously and that they're going to feel comfortable going out to eat. So yeah, for me, it's something that's clear, concise, with a very specific view as to what they want to get across. So yeah, I'd say that's most important from a food and drink perspective. At the moment anyway, it's going to change as, you know, the course of COVID continues. But if it's something that is in the interest of both the business and the consumer, that's what I like to see.
Kaylin, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think quite similar there in terms of the expectation and what they actually want you to promote and get across. And I think another big thing for me is maybe from like a fashion and lifestyle perspective is that I don't think it's always immediately about sales. So personally speaking, if I do, you know, work with a brand or collaborate with them or whatever, I generally won't, but you know, it'll be because I actually really like it, or you know, it's something I've used before, that sort of thing. So if that being said, I'll not just post the ad, you know, 9 times out of 10 I'll try and, you know, mention it again, and maybe it might just come naturally, or I'll just try and promote it sort of out with, you know, the rigid, we want 1 grid post and 2 stories. I'll try and do a bit of a lead up, and or maybe like a couple of days before try and like plant the seeds, so to speak, with my followers, because I think then you can sort of gauge, you know, what sort of reception you're going to get. I often think if an ad just comes out of nowhere and you're like, oh right, okay, fine, pass it on, and that's fine. But I think if you sort of plant that seed, you're then planting the seed in your followers' head as well. So then when the ad or the collaboration comes about, you're like, oh right, okay, I never sort of thought of it like that, or that's something new. And for example, say it as a brand to do with clothing or whatever, you know, it's not that they're going to maybe go away immediately. For example, I don't have the swipe up link. So for me, promoting, I don't know, a pair of jeans, no one's going to automatically be able to buy that product. But actually, if it's you know, an independent brand or a brand that I've not mentioned a lot before, you're then getting them to notice that brand, and then maybe 2 months down the line they'll be in a shop somewhere and be like, oh, I actually remember such and such speaking about that, and you're like reigniting that flame or fire, you know. Then so I think that's quite important as well in terms of expectation. It's, you know, it's not like we want you to sell 50 of these when you post about it. It's just sort of understanding that actually you're still doing a good bit of groundwork in what you're promoting through one ad, for example. But if you get into a partnership, then that's when those sort of numbers can be discussed. I'm not sure, it's a bit long-winded, but yeah, I think it's important to just sort of give a bit of context to what you're promoting and why, or why you're working with a brand, you know.
Do you think that the way that you evaluate a campaign has changed? Are there metrics that you would use? Ilse, I'll ask you first, just in terms of, that's all right, don't worry, bless you.
Just as you were asking the question.
No, don't worry, just asking about evaluation and in terms of how you would evaluate the success of a campaign. First of all, are there any metrics that you would use? And secondly, has that changed since COVID?
Not really. I mean, I always sort of keep an eye on my insights anyway, and sort of checking to see when my audience is most active. But I think one thing that COVID was good for was testing out sort of different times for posting, because before, you know, I would be at work during the day, so I'm not good in the mornings. I'm not an early riser, so I would get up, literally have my coffee and go to work. So like posting in the morning is just, it would never have happened for me. So it's been quite nice to test that out. And also, yeah, just at the beginning of COVID, I'd never had time to sit down and analyse my hashtags, even though, you know, I do it a lot for work. We change up our hashtags for people we work with all the time. But I'd never actually taken the time to sit and look at mine. So now it sort of, I think one of the girls mentioned it earlier about it being like a bit of a pause on being able to reflect on what I wanted from the account going forward, and was able to sort of freshen things up. Like I changed all my highlight covers and just things like that. I guess actually seeing what hashtags were working, and yeah, just getting to grips with my insights a bit better. It's weird with Instagram. Some things you think are going to do amazing, don't do amazing. The algorithm still baffles me even now. But yeah, just a bit of time really to get to know what content works, and there's a bit of like a pause on life. Anyway, in terms of content, I got way too caught up before in how my grid looked, and I was really quite like, I wouldn't post something if I was worried that it didn't fit. Whereas now I'm like, I'm not as bothered by it, and I've learned that my audience hadn't. They just want to know what the food is like and if it tastes good. So it's been quite good in that respect, because I've sort of learned to take a bit of a step back and not worry as much about it.
Charlotte, what's your thoughts on the evaluation side of things?
Yeah, I think Keelan raised a really interesting point, and this is something that I push for a lot in the campaigns that I work on. It's about understanding the impact beyond direct sales. And I think influencer marketing, because it does kind of sit in this like middle ground in between PR, marketing, and like word of mouth, sometimes brands don't necessarily value the long-term impact as much, and they just want like the instant results, which like I understand, obviously everyone wants those instant results, but a lot of the time they're not gonna happen. So I definitely personally try to focus on like the longer term things that come out of it, so the continued conversations that I have with people about like a product or a brand, or like Keelan said, like I'll continue to post about things because I work on campaigns that are for things I genuinely enjoy. And I know that a lot of the campaigns I've worked on recently have been a case where it's been stuff that I've been buying myself and just posting about constantly. Like I have lost count of how many times I've posted about baked goods on my Instagram over the last like 4 months. And it got to a point where like one of the companies that I kept buying from, they were like, you've posted so much about us, do you want this like free box of cakes? I was like, well, obviously I want a free box of cakes. But it's about the kind of continued relationship for me, both with the brands and with the audience. I think that's when things have the most impact, because I find it really useful to know I think it's maybe because I do come from a marketing background, but to know where my content fits in like the product life cycle, or like the point of the decision making process that a consumer's at. So it might be a case of like they are just looking for options, or they weren't necessarily looking for options, but now they're considering something because they did see someone post about it. But they might not buy that until like 2-3 months later, until they think, all right, I actually need that now. And I remember a few months ago I saw that post, or I spoke to this person about that thing, so now I'm going to buy that. But that's not always measurable. I wish it was. It would make my life a lot easier if it was, but unfortunately that's not the way things work. And I find it really, really useful when people on the other side of the campaign appreciate that.
Just an evaluation related question that's just come in from the audience. Do brands ask to see your analytics post campaign? Keelan, I'll ask you first.
Not all the time, personally speaking. But I quite like sending that across, because I think it just sort of closes out a campaign, and they can see firsthand like how many people they've reached, how many people have engaged with, you know, what you've been sharing. Again, for me, it comes back to the big number on the front of someone's profile. You know, if someone has a huge following but actually they don't get the engagement, I think it's quite unfair on a brand as well. And I think maybe it's just that transparency again. But I have had a few times recently, and it's obvious, it's quite obvious, it's given, you know, COVID and what it's brought with it for brands, and, you know, fear and wanting to sort of just get out to the most, you know, as many people as possible. But a lot of people have come forward and asked, you know, can we send you something just on like a gifted basis, a PR sample or whatever you would like to call it. But then at that point they've asked for insights. So I just think there's a bit of like a blurred line between, and as I say, I don't have a massive issue sharing that, but it's the sort of expectation, just going back to that again, Elsa, that you've said, it's, you know, if you're sending me this with no obligation to post, where you want to see who it would reach, and, you know, if there's something more, maybe follow through with that. And, you know, if they send something in the first instance that is just like a sample, and they're happy with the engagement, or they see that there's good engagement there, then, you know, maybe follow up on that and maybe pull through with something further on down the line. Or yeah, but I mean, it's just to answer your question, no, not always. But yes, I quite like when that is the case.
And just a question from the audience in terms of your experience through lockdown. Has lockdown had an impact on what you're interested in locally? And is there anything new that you might start focusing on with a wee bit of a more local angle? Keelan, I'll ask you that one if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think for me, I like to go out for coffee a lot. So it's been sort of trying new coffee shops, and I do try and stick local, and post about, you know, independence and that sort of thing. So, well, where it may not be restaurants, so I don't tend to eat out all that often, but I would definitely go for coffee on the daily sometimes. And it's been trying new coffee shops or cafes and that sort of thing. And I think during lockdown there was quite a culture of that, because it was, you know, you weren't doing much else, but there was a Saturday morning when you could have went to 12 Triangles and there was a queue forming around the road, and it was just sort of like an exciting thing to do. So I think, yeah, it's made me really appreciate what's in our city, what's right in the doorstep, and going and exploring these places. And then, you know, if you've had a good experience, passing that on through your channels, I suppose. So yeah, I would like to think I'd do that.
Charlotte, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, I just moved before lockdown. So I moved to this new area. I moved from like just outside of Glasgow, basically into the city centre, near enough. So I moved to this place thinking, oh, it's going to be great. I'm going to have all these great cafes and restaurants and shops around me. And so I live in the south side of Glasgow, and it's a really like thriving independent scene for food and retail. And then I moved here and everything's shut. So it's definitely been it's definitely driven my content a lot, because it's kind of been me getting to know my new area and trying all these new places. And I very much like going out for food, going out for coffee. I'm the same as Keelan, coffee every day at least. So yes, it's definitely made me more aware of what's happening locally. I think I always have been, but now it is on a new level, because I think as well, pairing lockdown with being in a new place. And as well, there's a lot to be said for kind of how lockdown pivots have changed things accessibility wise. So I have chronic health issues, which means I can't always go out for dinner all the time. I can't always go to these new places. But see, because so many places have pivoted their business and have started offering home options or just different ways to experience their brand, that has been brilliant. Like, I feel like the first few weeks of lockdown, I was busier than I ever been, because I had all these like Zoom workshops and getting all these cook at home takeaway things. So it's definitely changed my kind of perspective and my content as a result. I think that would have just happened naturally.
Elsa, it's obviously slightly different for you because Ed and Eats is focused very much on supporting Edinburgh food businesses. I just wondered, obviously you said you set up a new site during lockdown. Any tips on how to get started on micro-influencing, and particularly around adapting to the current situation? What would be your recommendation for somebody starting something new?
I think that it has, first, like for me, it was always a hobby. So I think it has to be, you have to do it because you love doing it, because consistency is key. You will lose followers if you're not consistent and if they don't feel like you're being authentic. So they want, for me, I find that my followers, they like regular content. They like to know where you're out and about. I mean, I get so many messages even from people that are going to be visiting the city asking for recommendations, and I love it, because I'd much rather they come to me than go to TripAdvisor and end up eating somewhere that I definitely wouldn't recommend. But yeah, I think you have to do it because you have a passion for it, and like, I want to share all my local knowledge with tourists so that they come to Edinburgh and they get a good experience and they don't eat at Hard Rock Cafe. I mean, sorry if anyone loves Hard Rock Cafe. I'm not having a go, but I'd much rather right now them come and spend their money in a business that really, really needs it and is suffering, because that's what I'm passionate about. And yeah, I think that's the most important thing, is do it because you love it, not because you want free stuff. Because for me, it took probably, like, I've been doing it 5 years. In the first 3 years, I didn't get anything for free, but I just kept, I was still eating out, I was still sharing my pictures, because I love doing it and I loved interacting with people. So yeah, I think for me, that's the thing. You've got to do it because you love it and be consistent with it. Start it and don't give it up. Keep going. And if you love it, you will. It won't feel like a chore.
And starting to think about the future, scary concept. I don't have a crystal ball, obviously, but as we come out of lockdown, how have you found that you're having to adapt your service post lockdown? So adapting your channels. Keelan, I'll ask yourself that.
As I said before, I don't think I have massively, like, my life now coming out of lockdown hasn't changed hugely. I'm still working from home, and then now there's obviously a bit more freedom in the evenings and the weekends. But yeah, I think it's more just I have found that I haven't been as creative during lockdown. It was a bit of, so it is a hobby, but it was quite nice to have the extra time to focus on doing things that I just before would have said I didn't have time for. And I think I've dropped that a wee bit. So that's probably something I've noticed a change in. But I think going forward, it's going to be relatively similar for me. This sort of general stuff I share during the day, I still share what I wear every day, even though I sometimes tracks and bottoms and a hoodie. But I think, yeah, it's just going to be more, what I'm doing in the evenings, what I'm doing at the weekends, and that generally always is sort of local stuff within Edinburgh. I mean, we've been loving the market that's opened in Stockbridge, and just sort of promoting that sort of thing. But as I say, it's just sort of my life, so it doesn't change massively very often. which is a good thing, I suppose. But
Charlotte, what are your thoughts on the world post-lockdown and
Yeah.
influencing post-lockdown?
Pretty much the exact same, to be honest. I think that on the whole, the biggest challenge for me is going to be balancing time. I think because, I mean, none of us probably expected lockdown to last as long as it did. And I definitely got quite comfortable in how life in lockdown looked for me. So now that things are starting to open up a bit more and there's more that we can do, it's trying to ease myself back into normal life, whatever normal life is. So it is a case of like balancing my time a bit more and still being able to prioritize the things that I wanted to prioritize. But I think at the same time, people definitely are a lot more aware of who they're following. They're a lot more conscious of who they're following. So whilst that might not necessarily impact me massively, because I've always been very much about like, this is my I hate the word authentic. I've just written a like 35,000 word dissertation on authenticity and influencer marketing. So fed up with the word authentic. But it is like, people value people. Like that's why influencer marketing shot up the way it did, especially micro influencers. Like people value people over brands. It's about having a genuine connection with a person, even if it's not like the same relationship you have with a friend. Like it's still about that personable relationship. And I think overall that's going to see a bit of a shift. So I think work-wise for me, that's probably going to be good, both from a freelance perspective and from like content creation, is because people are starting to think differently about the way that they approach influencer culture and influencer marketing.
So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think definitely agree with what Charlotte and Keelan have said. I think for me it's sort of only reaffirmed like my love of doing it, and like don't get me wrong, there's days where I'm like, you know, we all have our ups and downs, but and just sort of learning more from it, keeping eating out locally, keep supporting local. I would like to expand beyond Edinburgh, and randomly, like 3 weeks ago, me and one of my friends were out for dinner and we set up a TikTok account, right? Because I was like,
I've seen that, it's good.
Never gonna get me on TikTok, right? So we went out for dinner and we're like, oh, let's put up a video and do a review. And it went mad. Like we've gained like 8,000 followers in 3 weeks, and it's just made me think about how content is changing, how people are consuming content. I mean, Instagram Reels, I'm going to need to get my head around that, because people who are posting them, their engagement is flying. So yeah, I think the future is just keeping on top of like how people are consuming the content and what people want. They obviously like video content. There's obviously a market for it. So thinking about how that fits in with Ed and Eats, and how I guess I can keep my followers engaged going forward, if, you know, none of us know what the future holds, but it's just sort of having an understanding of that too.
I'll go with one final question here from the audience before we wrap up. So this is quite an interesting one for me personally. What are the regular mistakes that PR agencies make when they approach you? Keelan, I'll ask you first.
I'll be totally honest. A lot of the relationships I've had with PR companies have been Edinburgh based, a few Glasgow and London, but generally I've always had a very good experience. There's nothing that comes to mind, you know, when you say the word mistakes, but I do think it's definitely a two-way street, and it's definitely, you know, all about the communication. And maybe I've just been lucky, but I've had that with the person on the other end of an email, and it's always quite nice to actually meet them in person as well, I think. And when it's happened, it's worked well, is when, you know, you're discussing something over email and say, listen, can we pick up the phone and have a conversation? And I think that actually works really well, because obviously a lot of things can be misconstrued, or, you know, the tone's different on an email. But yeah, thankfully, maybe I'm just lucky so far, but I've never had any huge mistakes, or any, maybe I'm the one making mistakes, I don't know. But yeah, it's been quite positive for me.
I suppose, Charlotte, you touched on earlier about the importance of agreeing the brief and making sure that it works from your channels. I suppose it's sort of flipping the mistake concept into what PRs can do better. So would you say that's the most important thing in terms of, I know we hate the word authenticity, but authenticity and making sure it fits with your audience?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just really important to make sure everyone's on the same page. I think that's the best way to avoid mistakes. And like Keelan, I've never really had any like huge mistakes that stick out to me. Like it's usually just little things like communicating things. Like everyone understands that things change, the goalposts change, but if you can just communicate that effectively, that's usually fine. Like I do think that communication solves basically all of the issues, be that communicating what the objectives are or like the purpose of the actual content and the campaign and how it all fits together and understanding the relevance, all of that sort of stuff. I think that just makes things a lot better in the long run, because everyone is, what's that phrase, everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet. Like everyone knows what the end goal is, and when you've got that in mind, you're all like going the same direction and understand what you're trying to do.
Ailsa, any thoughts from you on it?
No, like I'm the same as the girls. I've never had any bad experiences. I think the only time I've had to sort of push back on things is when a PR company's got in touch and they've just asked something without even looking at my page. Like I've had PR companies that represent, for example, like quite big supermarkets get in touch and be like, oh, will you post a like picture of X, Y, or Z? It could be like a pack of potatoes, and I'd be like, going back, like, you've clearly not looked at what I do, because that's just something that wouldn't fit in. But that's just, it's not a bad thing. It's just, you just go back and say, listen, that I wouldn't post a product on my grid, but I'd be happy, you know, to discuss doing something on my stories. And it's like, I think, you know, just what the girls were saying about communication, like it's not a bad thing. It's just turning something that maybe's been misunderstood into a positive conversation. And if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, then hopefully they find someone else that's more suitable for that type of campaign.
Just to close it out, I just think that you've brought some really good points, and just to say a huge thank you to all three of you for being absolutely wonderful. Keelan, Ailsa and Charlotte, thank you, and thanks to everyone for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's session, don't forget we've got quite a few future events coming up for CIPR. On the 10th of September, we have market research agency 56 Degree, who will be talking about how Scottish consumer behaviour has changed in 2020, and that'll include some insight from the Scottish Tourism Index, so it should be really interesting to find out how things have changed in Scotland. And for now, yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye.